Well, that was a spirited conversation, and there's more to come. So does remote work already need remodeling? I think it does, but that's my personal opinion. So next, we're looking at the pros and the cons of the new normal, whether that's working from home, working from a different country, a few days a week in the office, or a hybrid model unique to you. Remote work is what many of us have always wanted, and it works, right? Well, I don't think it's not working real well yet, but it will eventually. Our next speakers are here to discuss what already needs to be changed and how. Please welcome in conversation with Pascal Davies of EuroNews, ESMOAR CEO Kristin Luck, and Andela CEO Jeremy Johnson.
Good morning, Web Summit. It's great to be here today with my wonderful guests. So we're going to talk remote work and does it work. So Kristin from ESMOAR, I'm going to start with you. Does it work, yes or no?
Well, just to give some history on ESOMAR, we're the Global Association for Data and Insights Professionals. So we have a global association representing research data scientists from all over the globe. And I think, when I think about remote work, I think it's helpful to have some historical context about how we came to work as knowledge workers within a 9-to-5 sort of office environment. So, knowledge workers sort of adopted the machine model, the manufacturing model that much of work used to be based on. So everyone would have to meet in the same central location to manufacture a product, to be closely overseen by a manager. And when knowledge work became more prevalent, that exact model transitioned over to knowledge workers. So we all meet in the same office. We all have a manager that supervises us and oversees our work. Back in the 70s and 80s, you had access to filing cabinets as pre-computers, and that model never really changed. And so I think that when you look at how we live and work today and the access that we have to technology and the globalization of many businesses and many industries, like truly that more traditional way of working is a broken way of working.
Okay, and Jeremy, to you now. So in your company, you're sort of matchmaking the software engineers to the big tech companies. What changes have you seen since the pandemic and the ways that we're working?
It's been dramatic. I mean, we should probably start off with a little bit of background also. Andela is the world's fastest growing technical talent network. So we represent engineers in over 90 countries at this point who are working with hundreds of the world's top companies without having to leave their home country. And companies, engineering and remote work in general is not a new phenomenon. It's not a result of the pandemic, but it's certainly been dramatically accelerated. We've seen about 10 years of acceleration of the trends that were already taking place before happen in the past 18 months. And so what that's meant for roles, especially like engineering, where you can often quantify output, is much more willingness on the part of employers to think about, okay, you know what? I am open to remote. I don't think the genie is going back in the bottle. Like, I think this is going to be a longer term thing. Therefore, I might as well think about where I could source from. And the challenge then becomes, how do you think about assessing without as much cultural context? How do you think about compliance and logistics for a talent that is not going to be in a country you've ever been to? And that's where things start to get more complex in terms of how companies think about it, and part of why Andela has had such a strong year, because these are problems that we solve for people.
Okay, great. And I want to talk to you, Kristin, about women. So the shocking statistic, according to McKinsey, 79% of men said they had a positive experience from working from home, compared with just 37% of women. So what's going wrong?
Well, there's a number of factors. Harvard Business Review came out with a study, I think maybe just a couple weeks ago, around Zoom fatigue. and how Zoom fatigue has accelerated depression and anxiety in people, and the statistics were significantly larger for women who feel like, you know, they've got to really put on a professional appearance at all times when they're working from home, which is challenging, of course, when you're also oftentimes managing your children, homeschooling, and everything else going on within the house. You know, in the first year of the pandemic, 54 million women around the world left the workforce. And so, you know, obviously that has widened the gender gap in employment significantly. Of the women who lost jobs in 2020, 90% left the workforce entirely, compared to around 70% of men. And there was a Women in the Workplace study, so that was conducted last year by McKinsey and leanin.org, and their assessment of the number of women that have left the workforce because of that, they are estimating that global GDP will be $1 trillion lower by 2030.
Okay, so what can be done, you know?
An amazing impact.
It is. And what are the solutions to sort of giving women that space so that their remote working conditions can be better?
Yeah, it's challenging. I mean, I think, you know, hopefully now that vaccination rates are increasing and kids are going back to school, that there'll be less stress on women. And that's not to say, I know there's many male parents, of course, and fathers in the audience as well, but, you know, women on average do about 75% of the world's unpaid care work. You know, the demands of which have obviously grown substantially during the pandemic. And when I say unpaid care work, it's taking care of kids, it's cooking, it's taking care of parents in many countries. You know, 40% of mothers compared to 27% of fathers are the ones responsible for the homeschooling and taking care of kids. And so if you look at how many hours a day, if they're spending 3 hours a day even on those tasks, that's a considerable part-time job on top of everything else that they're doing, working a full-time job. So it's no wonder that, you know, that women have chosen to exit at certain times. But I think that there's a lot of things that employers can do to improve those situations.
Yeah, and what do you think about the solutions for women, Jeremy?
To this problem?
No.
I feel like I'm not qualified.
I'm qualified.
I think it's a massive challenge. We thankfully have not seen, like in the company, such dramatic numbers, but in our talent network, it has been harder to find female software developers. It has been harder, you know, in a variety of ways that we are also trying to address. We believe it creates a better environment for all of our employees and members of the network to have more gender balance. And this is a material challenge I think the world is facing with remote work.
Yeah.
I think too that, you know, employer flexibility, you know, better parental leave policies, particularly in the U.S., like more, you know, more flexible work from home environments, like all of these things that we say benefit women, they benefit men as well. And they allow men to be equal partners in that family experience. So when we talk about programs and benefits that benefit women, I think they benefit men as well.
Absolutely. Now, Jeremy, I want to talk about competition in the workplace. How has remote working changed that? So are companies looking for cheaper labor, would you say, or are we increasing competitiveness in jobs and the people we're hiring?
We're seeing a very different phenomenon right now. As people have gotten more comfortable with remote, what we've actually seen is a pretty extreme focus on quality and the caliber of talent. And so for our clients, you've got, you know, a few hundred of the top tech companies around the world now leveraging Andela to source talent. They're primarily trying to find better talent than they otherwise would be able to. And so I think it's partially a function of the macro climate that we're in right now, where people are just trying to move as quickly as they can and a little bit less cost conscious. I think if the economy were to turn, then I think this might change. But for the time being, it's just an extreme focus on, I want to find the best possible talent I can. And I'm open to the idea of going much more broad in how I think about that. And I actually think that's a healthy thing for the world, because what it's doing is compressing global, not compress, but it's pulling up global wages in emerging markets in ways that would have been very surprising only a few years ago. We're seeing people with very specific types of skill set even in very emerging market parts of the world, we have our largest presence is across Africa, having salaries meaningfully increase to get closer and closer to the US and Europe in a way that it was just moving much more slowly before this.
Okay, that's fascinating.
I think, and I think there's a really, I'm like an avid reader of the New Yorker, and there was a really interesting article in the New Yorker basically about is knowledge work broken? And the entrepreneur Chris Hurd had a really interesting theory within there, which is you can have two different cultures. There's an office first culture and there's a remote first culture. And in office first culture, I'm only hiring the people that are in the radius of my office. So my talent pool that I have available to me is pretty limited, versus a remote first culture where I'm hiring the best talent from around the world, to Jeremy's point, regardless of location. And yeah, maybe they're not going into an office every day, but I'm getting them together quarterly or monthly, depending on what their roles are and when I want to organize team meetings. And this kind of creates I think, a Darwinian effect for many businesses, because say for instance, I've got a company that's remote first and I have a competitor that's office first. Well, I can hire the best talent from around the world at lower costs, and I have lower overhead because I don't have an office space that I'm maintaining, or multiple office spaces. And so I'm eventually going to put my competitor out of business. And if you repeat that enough times, I'll be number one in my space.
Yeah.
Hands down.
It's just true. It's almost like gravity. You can fight against it for a while, but it requires energy. And eventually, you just have to let it go. It's going to become increasingly difficult for office-first cultures to compete with remote-first cultures, which is part of why this conversation about how to do remote-first well is so important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's look at the future, really. Is a lot of people are saying the hybrid model is sort of the key idea here. Do you think that's true, or what do you think? No, not so much, Jeremy. Why not?
It depends on how you interpret the hybrid model. And one of the challenges is definitions in this space are all so new that people mean all sorts of different things with the language. If what you're thinking is some people will be in the office and then some people will be remote, that actually makes it harder. It is really hard to have a meeting where 4 people are in person and 2 people are remote, because the people in person will naturally gravitate towards each other. It's human nature. It's really hard not to have that happen. On the other hand, if you mean what Kristin was saying by hybrid, about getting together in person once a month or once a quarter to build bonds and connections between the team, actually, I think that makes all the sense in the world, and the best remote-first companies are going to do that religiously. And so it depends what you mean.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to a woman yesterday, and she was saying that if she's even now though part of her staff is in the office and part of them are remote, if she's on a call, she has to schedule a Teams meeting or something, she won't have anybody in her office or do anything in person. Everyone has to be online because it levels the playing field. So to Jeremy's point, there won't be some people in the room that have a louder voice than others. I also think that when we think about remote work, we have to really differentiate that from telecommuting. When you think about telecommuting, when it first started, I think managers thought, oh, well, I'll give someone a laptop and internet access and an email address, and they're just going to work from home. And then we saw kind of a blowback to that when Yahoo and Best Buy started bringing employees back to the office, saying that it wasn't productive enough. When we talk about remote work now, we're talking about really using technology and systems to connect people in more meaningful ways, whiteboarding technologies, ways that people can collaborate better. We have Slack, lots of different communication and management tools that I don't think we had when telecommuting first came out. And so that, again, as collaboration drives innovation, diverse viewpoints, and being able to have a global staff drives innovation. There's been a ton of research around it. I just think personally, that's the new way of working, at least for knowledge workers that are not manufacturing a product.
Yeah. And we were talking a little bit about Zoom fatigue there. How can we overcome that, do you think? Because, as a female, we were saying it takes a while to have the space, it's time spent.
I don't wake up looking like this, unfortunately. I wish I did. My male coworkers definitely have a leg up. My former business partner and I talk a couple times a week, and, he rolls out of bed, he looks awesome. Like, this is a solid 30 minutes at least of work, at least. And so I just started putting some limitations, and I think many women have too, around the number of video meetings they're going to do a week. I have certain days of the week that I time block off where I'm not gonna do video calls. And the other thing that I've done is I've stopped having Zoom or Microsoft Teams automatically turn my video on when I go into a meeting, so I can assess, like, are other people on video? Is it a requirement of the meeting? Some people are really insistent on it and others are not. And I think, like, and also you can, like, change your Zoom view so that you're actually not looking at your face the entire call, which I think is helpful as well. Yeah.
I think we're going to see a massive shift in the next 24 months. This will happen very quickly around, like, norms for whether or not you use video. It's exhausting to stare into a screen all day. It just is. Regardless of gender, it is exhausting.
Yeah.
And right now, there's this sort of sense of, well, we miss being around people, so we're going to show our, like, love and support by having our cameras on. And there's something to that, but once you get to know people, once you have a real relationship, pick up the phone and just take a walk while you're having your conversation. Like, engage in something a little bit more active where you don't have to stare into a screen. And you're going to feel a lot better at the end of the day. And so I think that this is going to be a much more active conversation that companies should start having now and being more conscious of how they think about this.
All right, as we're coming to the end, I want to ask you a quick fire round. What are the 3 things that need to change?
I mean, I would start with that one, not needing people to be on camera constantly. I would move into make sure that there is some time to get together in person, whether it's once a month, once a quarter, twice a year. Make sure that there's time that is focused on building, like, relationships and, like, team bonding, because trust is a meaningful, like, variable in how effective teams are. And finally, like, I would think about, like, time zone overlaps and trying to not have people working, at, like, 9 p.m. at night or, like, 6 a.m. in the morning in order to be able to stay, like, aligned with, like, the norms. You can be anywhere, but it's really helpful if people don't have to create crazy schedules so they can live a, like, reasonable, sustainable life.
And for you,
Yeah,
Kristin?
I would say, like, one thing is, like, to keep to really think about your staff and the different needs of, like, introverts versus extroverts. I know a lot of companies have, like, planned, like, team activities and stuff online. Like, frankly, like, I'm kind of naturally introverted. The last thing I want to do at the end of the day is do, like, a cooking activity online with a bunch of people that I do business with. I just don't want to do it. And so, providing opportunities for people to opt out of some of those team building activities, I think, is healthy as well. Second, make sure you're looking at your workplace policies and that they're gender equal, and really taking into account the extra workload that women are carrying at this point and acknowledging that. And then lastly, really look at your global hiring practices. What can you do to hire a more global and more representative workforce? Because I do believe, to Jeremy's point, you get a better talent pool overall and a more diverse talent pool, and that drives innovation and new product development, and I think creates a better competitive environment for your company.
All right, Chris and Jeremy, we are up there, so thanks so much for your time on that. Looks like the future is remote work, but we need to change that. So thank you, Web Summit, and see you next year.
Thank you, Pascal.